John, really good to see you again, and thank you very much for being on the road with me this week.
It's great to be with you, Chuck.
John, you've been at Ridge now for over 20 years. I got to ask you, what keeps you there? What keeps you at Ridge?
Well, Ridge it's a winery with a lot of history in California. It goes all the way back to 1962, and it was one of the first wineries to really identify single vineyards as the means to get to high quality wines. And so when I joined Ridge, Ridge had already um, gotten a great number of vineyards, of high quality vineyards from all over California in its stable, so to speak. So, the raw materials that you're working with are really some of the best in California. So it's a great place to work, just in terms of the wines that you're able to make. But it's also, it's a winery that has a long tradition of really respecting its employees. It's really is kind of a family atmosphere. So it's a great place to be. It's a lot of people come here and really find a home, so to speak. I mean, we have an average tenure of around 14 to 15 years
Wow.
among all of our employees. So it's it's a great place to work.
Okay, and can I ask you, I mean, how were you first, recruited? Was that by Paul Draper? I mean, who or, what, why, brought you there?
Well, it's kind of funny. I my first job, I was um, well, just in my early 20s, I went to Europe to just do the post college kind of tour around. And my uncle Richard Olney was a food and wine writer who lived in the south of France, and I went to visit him. And he had a tremendous cellar that was just full of all the great names of the world in terms of wines, and that really opened my eyes. And I really I sort of caught the bug while I was there. And while I was down there, I met an importer who was importing Kermit Lynch, who was importing wines from throughout France into Berkeley, California. So my first job was actually in sales. I went to work for Kermit in his retail shop and selling to restaurants around the San Francisco Bay Area. And I did that for almost 5 years. But I kept getting drawn more and more to getting my hands dirty and really wanting to get to the source, wanting to know, how do you make wine? What's this all about? And I decided I was really more interested in winemaking than the selling aspect. But it really, and the funny thing is, it turned out to be a tremendous experience, because even when you get over into the side of winemaking, you realize that it's just all one big circle. You make it, but it also has to be sold. So yeah, I came back to California, and Ridge was just the logical choice for me. I mean, I really had my eyes set on it. I had been drinking Ridge wines, before I joined, and just kept in touch with Paul. And when an opening appeared in the late 90s, I jumped on it.
Okay. So then you're making wine, you get on the winemaking side. I have to go back though. Like you said, you kind of like throw everything together, because even as a winemaker, you still have to go out on the road and pitch and sell these wines, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, right.
And I guess, coming out of COVID, you'll start traveling again. In terms of your winemaking, was it just learning from experience and working with Paul, or did you have to go back to school as well?
I went back. It's funny, because since I was working in the import business, most of my contacts were actually back in France, and I went back to France and spent almost 2 years there. I did a winemaking program in Beaune, and but mostly what I was doing is I was doing internships with a lot of my sort of favorite wineries and winemakers, Domaine Tempier down in Bandol, and
Wow.
Gerard Chave in Hermitage, and a number of Burgundian winemakers as well. So that, I think it was mainly experience that it was how I learned. Paul's always Paul always likes to point out that Ridge has never really had a winemaker, beginning with Paul himself, who really had a 4-year degree in winemaking or in enology, and that because it really our winemaking approach is based first and foremost on tasting and just remaining in contact with the wine and just feeling your way as you go, as opposed to anything that might resemble a recipe about how the wine should be made.
Okay. So then you cut your teeth then making wine originally in France.
Yeah, I
S-
did.
So obviously, would you say then that has influenced you in terms of your winemaking style? So I guess maybe while a lot of people, and you can't throw all winemakers into the same boat and say everybody's chasing Parker points back in the say like the 1990s. So you, I guess you didn't chase those Parker points if you're influenced by how they made wine in France. Is that a true statement or not?
Well, I think that I think that there's definitely some truth in the fact that I came into winemaking with the European model, in which it's really the site that's the most important thing, as opposed to the New World model, where generally it's been a varietal first kind of approach. So you make a Cabernet from somewhere, or you make a Merlot. In France, you're making Hermitage, which happens to be Syrah. So yeah, I think in that sense, a focus on site, and when you have the right site, just sticking with it and trying to reveal what's really there, as opposed to getting into the winery and starting to add this or add extra oak because you really need the point. I think if you believe that you have the raw materials, then there's going to be enough people who can see that.
Okay, so you just want to give that final product, that final wine that's in that bottle for Montebello or Lytton Springs, for example. You're just trying to offer the consumer a sense of place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so 20 years on, you are now head winemaker and COO for both Montebello and Lytton Springs. What was the biggest challenge you faced stepping into this new role?
Well, I think so. We're fortunate really to have two locations. We have two wineries, one north of San Francisco and one south of San Francisco, which allows us to, have a winery right in the heart of the two main varietals we work with. So up in Healdsburg, north of San Francisco, where the focus is on Zinfandel, we have our Lytton Springs winery. And then south of San Francisco, way up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, is Montebello, where we're focused more on the Bordeaux varietals. And so, I previously was just in charge of the Healdsburg facility. So I had one focus, and I kind of use the sports metaphor in the sense that, I was the captain of the team, but I was still actively playing out in the field, if you will. I was getting my hands dirty. I was in the mix. And now, I can't spend enough time in one place to really have that role. So I've had to pull back, and I feel more like I'm the coach now. And that's been difficult in a way, because you get so used to really being there in touch and being playing that role in day to day, and I've had to turn those responsibilities over a little bit.
So you put your trust and faith now in your players, but they still have to follow a game plan, and you're the one coming up with the
Absolutely.
game plan, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so the biggest challenge is maybe you taking a step back and having more of a hands-off approach, managing
Yeah,
these two wineries.
yeah, yeah. It's stepping back, and at the same time, in a lot of ways, remaining that much more in touch with the overall approach to how we're making wines.
Okay, very good. Ridge is a gorgeous place to visit. I've had the opportunity to have visited a couple times. You sit on top of the Santa Cruz Mountains overlooking the Silicon Valley. I mean, it's amazing. I think you're somewhere up at what, 2,300 feet or something like that?
It goes up to 2,600 feet. Yes.
2,600 feet. So, what's the biggest change that you've witnessed with this iconic Cabernet Sauvignon over the past 20 years compared to when you first started?
Well, I think when I first started, one of the things that kind of it surprised me a little bit. I mean, we're fortunate to be distributed in dozens of countries, and certainly Montebello was a wine, is a wine that has international recognition. But what struck me when I first started was that your sort of the professional wine world was very aware of Montebello and gave it credit as being one of the great wines of the world, but it didn't seem to have the recognition in general that for example, all your first growth Bordeaux's do. And that's changed. It's really, I think it's really gotten the recognition amongst wine drinkers as a whole around the world, as being one of the top wines in the world. So I mean that's been good, but that's definitely been a change. Another thing which more on the winemaking side is that, I mean, when I first started, Montebello obviously being it's a Cabernet based wine. It's a wine of intense color, and very there's a lot of tannin in the grape, therefore in the wine. And we used to sort of take it as a given that there'd always be a few lots where there was a little more tannin than we really wanted, and we needed to pull that back. And we would do sort of a standard egg white fining, things to sort of just drop those tannins and moderate them. And we've made a lot of changes. One is for example, when we're pressing, we divide up our press fractions now. We used to not do that, and that's allowed us to really manage how much tannin really is getting back into the free run and into the wine from the beginning, so that we don't have to go in and intervene with fining the way we used to.
Okay.
A real big improvement, because a good bit of winemaking, I think, is really about getting that equilibrium, that balance from the beginning. And I've found that wines that really age, really develop, really evolve over a long time, it's much more about that balance and equilibrium than it is. I think there's a tendency sometimes to think that the bigger the wine, the more tannic a wine, it just because it's bigger, therefore it's going to age. But if it's not in balance, it doesn't really matter, what that palate impact is when it's young.
Okay, so you make some fine tuning with the filtration process, but has your interpretation or approach to making this beautiful Cabernet Sauvignon, is it different to say Paul and your predecessors, or has it remained the same?
I think it's remained the same, especially when you look at, I think there is that sort of, a lot of winemaking, or the approach to winemaking, I feel in many ways comes back to that sort of nature versus nurture discussion. That is, again, if you have the right varietal in the right soil, in the right microclimate, which sounds simple, but if you do have that perfectly dialed in, and you have those raw materials that you're working with, then a lot of the winemaking really is about guiding the process, as opposed to the winemaker who comes in and is going to add this and add some enological tannins and some enzymes, and really is going to make the wine. And that's always been the Ridge approach, is the hands-off winemaking, because really, I mean, I think it's really a question of, I think nature is really in control of the overall quality, as opposed to someone coming in and just dressing the wine up and creating it out of nothing.
And manipulating the process. So for example, California, we went through 6 years of drought, but regardless whether production's up or down, weather's good, right? Consistently good. We're in fire years, but normally you're able to push out a good product. So if you go back to say 2009, 2010, historically rainy years, then you're still if that's what the vineyard's going to give you, that's what you're putting out there. You're not adding anything extra to say to give somebody to give someone what they think Montebello Cab should taste like. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course we're always adjusting the winemaking here and there to fit the conditions of the vintage, but again, we're not getting out, we're not going into the cupboard and getting out all sorts of different additives to dial it in according to some recipe.
Okay. So you talk about location, you talk about soils, microclimates. I mean, that was my next question. What makes this location, sitting on the top of the Santa Cruz Mountains, what makes this Montebello vineyard so special? Why is this place so ideal for growing, your Cabernet Sauvignon?
Well, so the name Ridge comes from the fact that the Montebello vineyard is situated along the top of a ridge line, and if you look east, you see the Silicon Valley below. If you turn around and you look west, on a clear day, you can see the Pacific Ocean 15 miles away. So California, by and large, is a warm, if not a hot climate. But with the proximity to the Pacific, the ocean acts essentially as an air conditioner over the whole vineyard. So it's a very unique climate for grape growing, in that it's a much cooler. It's one of the coolest regions for growing grapes in California. So that's one important factor. And one of the things it does is it allows us to get ripeness at lower sugar and with better acidity. Another factor is that if you go to Europe, certainly in France, limestone is very common in almost all of the vineyards. If you come over to California, our geology is more volcanic in origin, so we really don't have very much limestone. One of the few places it exists, however, is in the Santa Cruz Mountains. So we have a very unique soil structure in that we have a lot of limestone in our vineyards at Montebello. And after that, it really comes down to really matching the right varietal to those conditions. And again, in the cooler climate, the Bordeaux varietals, we feel really give the most concentration and the most sort of intensity in terms of varietal choice.
Okay. And you talk about weather. Obviously, you have the influence from the Pacific Ocean at 2,600 feet. Are you above, say, the fog line? Are you still getting fog up there? What happens with the fog? How high up does it go up the mountain?
So so when you start at the base of the mountain and you drive up, it's almost a 5-mile drive to the top, and just about 3 miles up, you hit about 1,800 feet, and that's generally where the fog line is. And when there is fog on the bay side, and it's in when you're going up, it's almost like taking off in an airplane, because you're socked in for the first 2-3 miles up the hill, and then you just break out into this sunlight, which again, you have the coolness, so you're keeping the temperatures down, but we're getting all of that southeast sunlight for the grapes. So again, it's one of the ideal conditions of the mountain.
Okay. And is there a next step in terms of the evolution of Montebello Cabernet Sauvignon, or you just continue to put out a product that you've put out since 1962?
Well, I think, I think we certainly we're trying to, to a certain extent, yeah, we're doing the same, but we're always trying to do it a little better. But we are, one of the biggest changes that's happened over the last, 6 or 7 years is that as you get up to the top of the mountain, there are, so I should say, vines were first planted up at Montebello in the 19th century, and there was an actual Montebello winery in the 1880s. And a lot of those vineyards were abandoned during Prohibition, and they still lay fallow. And we were able to acquire some of that land, and so we are replanting some of those old vineyards, which we think are perhaps the highest quality, or amongst the highest quality sites for growing Montebello. So we're pretty excited about that. We've actually just started to receive some of the crop off of the.
So how many acres are we talking about that you've replanted, or how many rows?
Well, so we have about 20 to 25 acres total potential that we're going to be able to plant.
Okay.
Again, the acreage can be just a bit deceiving, because when you're planting on a hillside, you have to sort of subtract about 25% of that off that you lose from terracing your slopes. So, but still, it's a significant amount of acreage, certainly for the mountain.
Okay. And how many acres total up top, or are there on the mountain?
Well, there's a total of about 85 acres. That's split between the two wines we make, which is the Montebello and then our estate Cabernet Sauvignon.
Right.
So
okay.
all from the same vineyards, but our estate Cabernet is from the plots and the vineyard blocks, which tend to give a wine which is just a little rounder, just a little bit more approachable, sort of the wine to drink while you're waiting for your Montebello to age.
Okay. And in terms of do the vines go back then, the original vines 1962, or how old are some of those vines there?
It's a bit of a mixed bag. There are vines that are 60 years old that go back that far. Although it's a small percentage, because what we've done is we've replanted vines as they succumb to disease and virus over the years. So it really is a mix from things in our new plantings, which are as young as 6 years old, all the way up to 60.
Okay, 6 to 60 years old. Okay, so this cab, I mean, it's gorgeous. And what I find amazing about your Cabernet Sauvignon is that it's expensive. It's still affordable compared to, like, say, these high-end luxury Colt cabs. So is that done intentionally on your part?
Well, yeah, I'd say yes, it is. I mean, our customers are our greatest asset, and our wines are not the cheapest wines out there, but we feel that we're delivering, and it's certainly our aim to deliver value. So we feel that for our customers, they're getting their money's worth, and I think that we don't want to get into a situation in which our wines essentially just go to the highest bidder, and I think we lose that face, we lose that connection with our customers. I mean, we're fortunate to have a tremendous following, both in our out of our tasting room, as well as internationally. I mean, we get a constant stream of people from outside the U.S., especially from the UK. It's our top export market. Who come in and it's talk about the last bottle of Ridge they had and just loved.
Well, your wines have really good distribution here in the UK in terms of they're all in the right spots, say London Fine Dining, where I live, and some really smart, shops such as Hedonism. So, that's my next question. You can be purchased in over 55 countries. What's total case production for for the two cabs?
For the two cabs? So the total production for both the Estate Cabernet and the Montebello is around 7,000 cases, and that's split up pretty much half and half. So 3,500 cases of Montebello is typical, and 3,500 cases of the Estate Cabernet.
Okay, and is that? I also noticed you also sell some Chardonnay, and I've seen some of the Chardonnay here in the UK. I think I saw a bottle once at Hanford Wines. Is that normally then just available direct to consumer out the cellar door, or do you make some Chardonnay, and how much you produce, and where's that made? Are the vineyards there on the mountain as well?
Yeah, so the vineyards are a part of the Montebello vineyard, and it's something we make in small amounts. Around 1,600 cases is average.
Okay.
And it's limited in a lot of ways because we plant it on the parts of the vineyard that have the highest amount of limestone in it. So that sort of self-limits how much Chardonnay we produce. And we do distribute it, but obviously since it's in smaller production, you don't see it quite as often.
Okay. So then are you maxing out at 7,000 cases, or can you say, can you make more if demand's there by planting additional rows? How do you build up that case production?
Well, as we were discussing, we are replanting some of the abandoned parts of the vineyard, so that will increase the production.
You said 20 to 25 acres.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So that's happening. That's undergoing, and we're also replanting some of the older vineyards as they really go into just stop producing. So I think that will bump it up as well. I don't think that my hunch is that I don't think we're ever going to. I think it's always going to be an allocated wine. There's a tremendous demand for it. But we will be making some more.
Okay, good to hear. Before we talk about the 2020 vintage, can you just give me a brief overview of what 2019 was up there on top of the mountain for you guys?
Sure. So 2019, my second vintage at and I was working at Montebello at the time, was 1997, and that was the last time that we really had a bumper crop. And in 2019, we could tell there were a lot of grapes on the vine, and we so we did some thinning, but we had a tremendous canopy to go with it. So getting those grapes right was not a problem. And in an interesting way, I mean, the wine, even though there were higher yields per vine, it made a wine which was actually quite structured as Montebellos go. And yet in 2020, when we had lower yields in 2020, and yet, I mean, to me at this point, the 2020 is obviously still young, but the 2020 is much more of that sort of the velvet glove and the iron fist. I mean, there's this roundness to it, which is makes it very appealing young. But there's a lot of structure there. So I think it's also, as usual with Montebello, going to be something that's going to age for decades.
Okay. 2020, let's talk about COVID. The winery, the tasting room up there, back open for business, inside, outside?
Yeah, we have been open outside for a number of weeks, and we've just started accepting customers for inside, which is great. We've been wanting to do it for a long time.
Yeah, back to business and sharing your wine. Now, what
Yeah.
about in terms of 2020 fire years, especially Napa Sonoma's hit hard? Were you guys, I mean, obviously, Santa Cruz Mountains, you're south of San Jose. So fires were further away, but were you affected by smoke taint or anything like that? Or was it a normal vintage for you guys?
Well, 2020, I don't think anyone in California, I don't think it was a normal vintage for anyone. The huge difference in the difficulty in 2020 was that the fires started by lightning. Typically, the fires would start later in maybe one location or two locations. And here there was fires all over California. So, the firefighters were just challenged.
Yeah, they were stretched. Yeah.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, I mean, we were really fortunate. Luck of the draw, really, that the fires were not very close to us. And also, what we learned is, even if the fires aren't that close to you, a lot of it really depends on the wind. Which way does that smoke get directed? So we were among the fortunate. It was certainly not a stress-free vintage, but we escaped without any damage from the smoke.
Okay. So in terms of 2019, this is what I'm hearing talking to other winemakers like, Marisa Taylor over at Chimney Rock, and I'm sorry, Marisa Taylor over at Rutherford Hill, and Elizabeth Young at Chimney Rock. 2019 was a welcome year for winemakers, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like they want more of these vintages. 2020, very tough. And like you said, depending on location, you guys are fortunate. You guys, are away from the fires, the wind's not blowing, so you don't have to deal with this. So 2020, production's down. It's not a bumper harvest, but that's just because of the yields. That's just because of the weather then.
Correct.
Okay. Great. Well, look, but it sounds like you got two nice back-to-back vintages that you're putting out, correct?
Yeah. No, it's we're very happy with it.
Okay, very good. Well, listen, John, I'd love to get you back on to talk about your Zins because I'm a huge Zin fan. But I think that we'll have to leave that for another episode if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. Love to do it.
Before you go, I'm going to ask you 4 questions. I call this the bin end Q&A. So just give me the first thing that pops to mind. Are you ready to go?
Okay.
What's the wackiest thing you've ever eaten with your Montebello Cabernet Sauvignon?
Pizza.
Pepperoni or just?
I can't remember exactly. I think it was something simple like a margarita.
Okay, that sounds amazing. Living or dead, which celebrity would you want to share a bottle of your Montebello Cab at Ridge?
Billy Collins, the American poet.
Bill, okay. I haven't had that answer yet. If you could make one wine anywhere else in the world, where and which grape variety?
Bandol, Mourvedre.
Yeah, you know what? That is a beautiful part of France. I've been to Domaine Tepier and Pérignon a couple times, and those wines, they're well made and they can just work forever. They can just live forever, it seems like.
I've never, as much as I admire the grape growing in other areas, I've never ever seen Mourvedre that reaches the heights of what it does in Bandol.
And you mentioned earlier you did a stretch. Was it, you said Tempier where you worked?
Yeah. I was longtime friends with that family and spent a lot of time down there.
Wow. I mean, that's, just amazing wines. Last one, money, no object. Which bottle of California wine would you open tonight for dinner, but it cannot be one of yours?
Well, like I said before, California is a warm, if not a hot climate in general, and I'm a big uh, I'm a big fan of Carignan. I think it's a grape that does really, really well and gets overlooked a lot here in California. I sometimes I call it sort of the cactus of grape varietals, because it can just sit there in the heat, and yet it produces this wine which is balanced, relatively low in alcohol, and just thoroughly enjoyable, especially if you're looking for something to drink, in the summer. And I think that Birkino, and they're
Mhm.
located in Santa Cruz. I think John Locke does a great job with it. So that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Berikino yeah, they produce some really nice wines, and again, like yours, they have really good distribution in the
Yeah,
United Kingdom as well. So fantastic. Well, listen, John, that was awesome. I really enjoyed this, and I want to thank you for being on the road with me this week.
it was a pleasure. I have to do it again.
Yeah, I want to get you back on and talk about your Zins.
That'd be great.